All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining Brooklyn for Peace for tonight's forum, Iran at a Crossroads, featuring Ervand Abrahamian, Etan Mabourakh, and Lara Rabiee. They'll discuss the current political, social, and global dynamics shaping Iran today. My name is Diana Suri, for those who don't know me. I'm the program and events coordinator here at Brooklyn for Peace. We're grateful you guys chose to spend your evening with us. Before we begin, just quick few Zoom housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentations tonight. We want to minimize any background noise. If you have any questions for our speakers, you can feel free to place them in the chat throughout the program. And at the end of the program, we will address the questions with the Q&A portion. Since our founding in 1984, Brooklyn for Peace has worked to prevent war and challenge the social, racial, environmental, and economic injustices that fuel violence. And thanks to the support of our members and community partners like you all, we've been able to continue this work for more than 40 years, and we're very grateful for that. In this challenging moment of ongoing war and military aggression, organizations like Brooklyn for Peace are needed more than ever. What makes BFP unique is our commitment to educating and organizing across multiple issues and geopolitical crises. So wherever the need for peace and justice arises, we show up. We want to highlight a few upcoming opportunities you guys can participate in to get involved with the work of Brooklyn for Peace. We have our weekly Saturday vigils against Trump's war. That's on Saturday, May 16th at 2 o'clock, right outside the Long Island Railroad station at Flatbush Ave and Hanson Place. We also have our upcoming open community meeting. We really encourage members, non-members, people new to Brooklyn for Peace to come and join us on Monday, May 18th at 6:30. It'll be held at the Brooklyn Friends Meeting House, right on Skimmerhorn Street, and we would love to see your faces. And it's an opportunity really just to share your concerns, some ideas you might have, and we just want to have an opportunity to get everybody together. So before we move into tonight's discussion, I briefly want to ask for your support. While we proudly offer free public programming like tonight's and our in-person events, they're not free to produce. So community donations directly support our educational programming, our organizing efforts, and staff who help keep these conversations possible. So if you're able to contribute, just right after I speak here, I'll drop a donation link in the chat. So whatever you can give, no matter how small or big, we really appreciate it because it's going to help us continue promoting peace, justice, and the critical public dialogue. So now back to tonight's program. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have Ervand Abrahamian. He's a distinguished professor emeritus of Iranian and Middle Eastern history and politics at Baruch College. He's a leading historian of modern Iran. He is currently writing a book on the 1979 revolution in Iran. So thanks so much for being with us, Ervand. We also have Etan Mabourakh. He's a Jewish and Iranian-American political strategist. He's an organizer and advocate, currently serving as organizing manager at the National Iranian-American Council. He's also a proud board member of Brooklyn for Peace. His work focuses on anti-war organizing, immigrant justice, civil rights, and mobilizing the Iranian-American diaspora nationwide. And finally, we are joined by Lara Rabiee. She was born in Iran and immigrated to the United States during the 1979 Iranian Revolution. She's a graduate of CUNY New York School of Law and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Lara currently serves as the assistant director of Lincoln Hospital, HHC, where she works to improve public health outcomes and reduce disparities in healthcare access. So thank you everyone for being here tonight with us. We hope this conversation offers both a critical insight and meaningful dialogue. So I will turn it over to Ervand right now, and he can help us kick it off. Ervand, if you can please unmute. Hang on. Are we having some trouble? Hang on a minute. I'm sorry, I don't know.
There's
Okay.
Oh, Ervand, there
Yeah.
you are.
Okay. Now
Welcome.
you can hear me. Okay. Yes. Once the war first started in June of last year, and then restarted this more recently, there's been much criticism in the media that Trump has not articulated a coherent reason for the war. And when they're looking for Trump to give a reason, they're looking for a wrong place, actually. Where they should be looking for the reasons is in Tel Aviv, because since 1979 revolution, U.S. presidents, with the one exception I'll get to, is the Obama administration, the administrations in Washington have outsourced basically their Iran policy to Israel, which means basically to Netanyahu. And here, what one has to look for is what is really the policy of Israel in the past and at the present. Now, if you look at the Israeli policy in the long term, there have been very consistently and insistently demanded that Iran should have no nuclear research, no nuclear facilities, no basically knowledge or even a scientist involved in nuclear research. They've been consistent on that. They've been actually very insistent on it. And this has only created a major crisis between Israel and, on one hand, Israel and United States and Iran, because Iran's position has always been they have a right as a self-respecting, independent, sovereign state to have research on nuclear technology. For them, nuclear technology is basically a sign of being modern, being basically a self-respecting state in the modern world. So they've been also very insistent and consistent on this route. They have also paraphrased and added that while they're doing research on nuclear science, they're not interested in nuclear weaponry. So that their idea that they're going to develop a bomb, they have insisted that is not on the books. That's not their intention. They have no desire to have a nuclear bomb. The Israeli position is, yes, but if you have some nuclear knowledge, you can eventually develop a bomb, and therefore that's dangerous. You should have no, basically, nuclear research. And on the whole, American presidents, with the exception of Obama, basically followed the Israeli policy. The attitude in Washington was that we have no embassy there. We don't have much information about Iran. Israel knows what goes on in Iran. If we need any information about Iran, we'll ask the Israelis. They're knowledgeable, they're savvy, they'll tell us what we need to know. So basically, the U.S. has followed the Israeli policy. This, I'm not saying Israel is so powerful that it forced the United States to follow its policy. It's much more the abdication in Washington of not having a policy. Normally, when you look at governments like major governments like United States, when there's a crisis in some area, they will have institutions that have a task force to deal with the crisis. And you would expect a task force on Iran to give advice to the president on what's going on in Iran, what should be the policy. But there has been, except with the period of Obama, basically no State Department facilities, no State Department knowledge, no National Security Council, even in Washington, that knows or is interested in Iran. Maybe there are some people in the Pentagon one doesn't know of, but as far as the CIA is concerned, the State Department is concerned, the National Security Council, it basically has no basic experts on Iran. The few experts that existed under Obama were basically eased out or silenced, so that they're not in the play. So the result is basically policy is made in not in Washington, but in Tel Aviv. And there, Netanyahu persuaded easily Trump that because the Islamic Republic had lost a lot of its popularity, in fact, I would say it lost its legitimacy, especially after mass killings, that this regime was so fragile that a few days of bombing will bring the regime down. And therefore, the problem of so-called existential threat of Iran and going nuclear would be basically solved. And the exception, of course, is the Obama period, where Obama changed U.S. policy and broke from Tel Aviv, where he made the decision that, yes, Iran has the right to have nuclear research on condition that it verifies that it's not doing research for nuclear weaponry. And that was the beauty of the agreement, because if you look at that agreement, it was very concrete, very specific. Netanyahu claimed it was very vague and sort of ambiguous, but in fact, it was 150 pages of very detailed, basically, demands which Iran accepted. A few demands that were actually very concrete is Iran could uh, enrich to the point of 3.67% of uranium. It couldn't be more precise than that. And of course, to have nuclear weaponry, you need something like 90%. And that amount of 3.67% was actually very limited. Anything that Iran produced extra to that had to be exported. Also, on top of that, some of the more advanced centrifuges that Iran had were actually disbanded. And added to that, there were over 100 monitors, international monitors, including American monitors, to make sure that the agreement was implemented. So that was actually a very practical and logical solution to the conflict. Except for Netanyahu refused to accept that because for him, the idea that Iran even had some nuclear scientists doing research was an existential threat because that few research could develop into a bomb. And as soon as Iran had the bomb, it would use it on Israel. So it became a second Holocaust image. And I won't go into internal Israeli politics, why he used that successfully to scare people in Israel. But the agreement itself was actually a very solid solution to the conflict that existed between basically the two sides. Of course, once Trump withdrew from this agreement at the urging of Netanyahu, that unraveled the situation and it has led to the present situation of war. And then that was, you could say, inevitable. Once the U.S. withdrew, then Iran counteracted by saying, well, there is no agreement. We can enrich further if we want, and we'll increase until the U.S. comes back to the agreement it had originally signed. So what Netanyahu was willing to sell to Trump was just a few days of bombing and the whole regime would collapse. And in fact, there was a speech that Trump made on the eve of the new attack on Iran. He said, it is time for the people of Iran, Persians, Kurds, Azeris, Baluchis, and Akhvavis, to shed from themselves the burden of tyranny and bring forth a free and peace-seeking Iran, i.e., he was asking everyone in Iran to rise up against the state and destroy the state. And in this list, actually, it's sort of funny because the last group he mentions, Ahvaris, uh, I thought I'm an Iran expert. I never heard of them. So I did what most people do, Google to find out who these people were. They happen to be a Sunni group that lives on the other side of the Caucasus in central Russia. So why they appear suddenly among the oppressed minorities in Iran, I leave to your imagination to figure out that one out. Anyway, the notion was that a quick attack on Iran would bring down the regime, and that would solve the problem, or change the regime, or somehow the country would break into a civil war, as happened uh, in Syria. Well, that didn't happen. Even though the regime is despicable, the regime had lost much of its as legitimacy. It still has its central core, the Revolutionary Guards, and some 15–20% of the population that supports the regime. That was withheld. So the regime did not collapse. In fact, the regime became stronger as a result of the bombing. Why naturally people who, even Iranians who hate the regime, when they see the country is attacked, especially when, almost every university in Iran is bombed by the Israelis, United States. Girls' schools are bombed. Research centers like the Pasteur Institute are bombed. Even Iranians who don't like the regime, they're not going to actually support an Israeli or American war or invasion. So what the war has done, instead of undermining or destroying the regime, is actually strengthened the regime and given it a second wind. It has given it somewhat of a nationalistic legitimacy, which it didn't have before. And this is going to actually create for Iran, the regime, some viability in the short run. I'm not talking about long run. It still has the problem of how to win over the public. But in the short run, as the war continues, it has basically an upper hand in controlling internal situation. Another unexpected result of this war is that Iran has discovered that its real strength is in the Gulf. And means that in future it's going to focus more on the Gulf and less on the Levant. And its influence and power in the Gulf is, in fact, a major trump card to use against the Trump, because controlling the Persian Gulf is actually controlling a great deal of trade, a great deal of oil, gas, fertilizers, and even finance, because in the Persian Gulf states, whether you're looking at Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Arab Emirates, Bahrain, these are very oil, gas rich countries whose income is also feds into into U.S. economy, into Wall Street, and a chokehold, Iranian chokehold on the Gulf actually has international repercussions far beyond the Middle East. It has particular repercussions on the whole capitalist system worldwide, because as oil prices go up, it's gone up from probably about $80 a barrel to 120. It can go up to 150. Some people talking about, if the Gulf keeps on being closed, it could go up to 200. That is going to have incredible repercussions in Wall Street. And what Trump is trying to constantly do is, okay, the war is done, or we're finished, or things will be resolved, in order to soothe the concerns of Wall Street, but that can only work for a certain period of time because as the crisis continues and the blockade of the Gulf continues, sooner or later things are going to unravel in Wall Street, and that could lead to a recession, which then could escalate into actually an economic depression people are worried about. So, in what the war has done, in fact, is created for Trump a major crisis when he thought, or he was misconceived, thinking that a short war, a 3-day war, was going to solve the problem. So the question now is, how is he going to get out of this dilemma? And the only way I could see him getting away out of this dilemma is actually accepting the Iranian premise that they have the right to have enrichment with the qualification that they don't go into weaponry, i.e., going back to Obama deal, which was an ideal deal, which Trump, denounced as the worst deal ever made by the United States in its history. So he'll have to actually somehow go back to that deal, maybe repackage it and say it's a different deal, it's a new deal, it's a brilliant deal, it's the best deal the US has ever made. But short of that, I don't see this crisis ending. Iran is not going to buckle under. Iran is not going to disappear. And the demand or pressure from Tel Aviv to actually deal with Iran somehow is still going to be there. Also, the question actually often is raised, why is there in Israel such obsession about Iran and the so-called existential threat? And to answer that, one has to go actually to Israeli policy towards the Palestinians. Israel has always had the Palestinian problem since 1948. Originally, the Israeli position, like Golda Meir's position, was there are no Palestinians, there are no such nation. We don't have to deal with it because they don't exist. Well, in due time, almost every country in the world, including the international community, accepted that the Palestinians were a nation, and therefore they had national rights. So then the Israeli position was that, yes, there are Palestinians, but the Palestinian problem is really kept alive and caused by external forces. First, it was Abdel Nasser in Egypt. Then it was actually the Soviet Union behind the Palestinians. Then it was Saddam Hussein, and then Assad and Gaddafi was the real problem. If they disappeared, the Palestinian issue would also disappear. You may remember one of the selling points about invasion of Iraq was that this was going to be a clear break in Middle East politics. It was going to really solve all issues, especially the Palestinian issue. Well, Saddam Hussein went, Assad went, Gaddafi went. Then it was Iran. Iran was seen as actually the real problem. So if you can get rid of Iran, then the Palestinian issue will basically die down. So that's basically another, I would say, motive for Israel being so obsessed about Iran. Of course, the fact is, even if Iran disappears off the face of the map, the Palestinian issue is still going to be there. And Israel will have to find another actually existential threat. And there's a perfect one existing there. It's actually Turkey. Turkey will be the future existential threat, especially since Erdogan has aspirations of turning Turkey into a new Ottoman Empire right next door to Israel. And Turkey would be a much greater, actually, objective threat to Israel than Iran ever was or is. So the only hope at the moment, I would say, is somehow Trump finds some way of breaking from the Israeli position and repackaging the old Obama agreement without ever mentioning, of course, the name Obama and coming to some sort of settlement with Iran on the nuclear issue. I'll stop there and turn over to Etan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ervand, and thank you everyone for being here. I want to just pick up on one point that Ervand mentioned, discussing um, just the general concern or lack or manufactured concern over an existing Iranian nuclear weapon. Um, as of last week, on May 4th, for the first time in United States history, actually, a group of 30 lawmakers led by Representative Joaquin Castro authored a letter acknowledging the only country in the Middle East that does have nuclear weapons, and it is Israel. And for so long, uh, the United States has actually been aware of the fact that Israel has somewhere now between 90 and 400, we don't know exactly how many, nuclear weapons. And this was a landmark shift in breaking of one of the most long-held taboos in U.S. foreign policy history, and those lawmakers directly tied their mention of this to the current war, and in an apparent attempt to uh, break the ridiculous nature of Trump's constant claim that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. They've agreed to not have a nuclear weapon, and if we are indeed concerned about nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, I think that's an important step forward. But I want to shift gears a little bit and try and just speak about what some of the broad anti-war demands have been from both my organization NIAC and the large coalition of groups who have been paying attention to these issues, like Brooklyn for Peace and others in New York. I even have a prop to show some of you. I have a T-shirt that we passed out to folks. This is 2 years ago. We organized a trip of New Yorkers down to DC, and we gave these out. And the demands are largely similar. It's no weapons for war crimes, no war on Iran, because we knew at the time in the unfolding genocide in Gaza that war with Iran was next, um, and to restore UNRWA funding and to deliver aid. But those demands, if for activists who pay attention to this work so closely, have been very clear, and it's a real shame that so many leaders have failed to hear them, and at least now. Um, Perhaps for the right reasons, perhaps for political reasons, with an election coming up in November, the Democratic Party is beginning to attempt to embrace some of those demands. And to dive, I think, more specifically into what those demands are right now for the community, I'm going to share my screen and go into the first one. Um, so this is a uh, the first thing that I think that we should recognize is that the U.S. Congress does have the authority and the ability to stop the war now by
Tone,
passing an Iran.
we can't see your screen.
Oh,
We just
I'll just stop sharing. I'll just talk then. That's okay. I'll share some of these things after. But the first thing that the U.S. Congress can do right now to stop the war is by passing an Iran war powers resolution. As stated in the Congress in the Constitution, the US Congress and the American people are the bodies that decide when our country engages in war. And it was laughable to me last week on May 5th, our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, uh, called the War Powers Act unconstitutional. And if you go back even to the authors of the Constitution, James Madison um, wrote under a pseudonym Helvidius in 1793 during debates with Hamilton. He wrote extensively about the need for war powers to be vested in the people and not a tyrant. I'm going to read you a quote. He said, In no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislator and not to the executive department. Beside the objection to such a mixture to heterogeneous powers, the trust and temptation would be too great for any one man. And clearly, that temptation has been too much for Trump to resist in distracting from his failed policies on immigration and the economy, and now dragging us into war on Iran, and that is uh, frustrating. But there is, for whatever the motivations may be, there is hope to hold on to politically. And the latest War Powers resolution vote, as of today, inched closer and closer to passage. The latest vote read was marked down at 49 to 50, and saw three Republicans switch. And more Republicans are being asked in town hall after town hall when they come home with gas prices, with oil prices, with diesel prices, for especially affecting farmers, and the closing of the strait affecting fertilizer. They're being pressed on this issue. So congressional war powers and Congress reclaiming its ability to declare war, which has been steadily eroded for a variety of reasons, since the authorization for use of military force with Iraq, is an important part of that. And another part which is the call from activists to block weapons, offensive weapons, and weapons of the nature of bulldozers to Israel. The same bombs and same bulldozers, bombs which have been used on Iran and used in Lebanon, bulldozers which have been used to demolish homes in the West Bank and to demolish homes and infrastructure in Lebanon. And that issue, like the Israeli nuclear issue, has been a taboo, difficult thing for activists to push on, including when we were asking for it in response to the genocide in Gaza in the early months. But as of yet, in the latest vote tally on that, 40 House Democrats, the majority of them, voted to block those weapons, including some very surprising members, people like Cory Booker, people like Adam Schiff, who are, it's one would struggle to describe them as progressive on Israel issues, but the political pressure is building to such an extent that they really can't ignore it anymore. And some additional things that activists have been pushing on are investigations now into clear and apparent war crimes, including the Minab school bombing, which has now it's now come out through investigations and statements from our own government that it was a double tap strike with our Tomahawk missiles, and whistleblower Wes Bryant, who is a former employee of the Center for Civilian Protections in the Pentagon, which was signed into law precisely to prevent such a tragedy, has come out saying that if his office was still intact, it was done away with by Hegseth last year. If he wasn't fired, if that office wasn't reduced, they would have been able to prevent that horrific tragedy. So there are calls for accountability. There have been additional letters and calls for investigations into that. Of course, the administration is dragging its feet and slow, but activists are still pushing extremely hard, and there is representation in Congress that agrees that we shouldn't use our Tomahawk missiles to blow up schools, and that AI should not be used autonomously to select target lists that could very easily be verified as no strike targets, like that school, which, according to public satellite data, according to Google Maps, for the last few years, one could have very easily determined that that was not a legitimate target. Some additional, I think, points here that activists are like myself and like so many others in DC and in the community are pushing on are just the economic costs of this war to the American people. I'll attempt to share my screen on some of these resources here. Let me know if this works. Diana. And if not, I'll just keep talking.
Diana, I think he has to be added as a host.
He is. I think when you did share initially, we saw it, but it was too zoomed in. Yeah, you're good.
How's this? Okay. So here is a resource. This is a live Iran war cost tracker. Now, Secretary Hegseth, when he was asked about this in front of a congressional hearing, he said the cost of this was $25 billion. And this tracker, really, it's quite a fascinating resource, tracks it down to the second, the hour, um, and estimates that the cost is much closer to $80 billion when also accounting for damage to U.S. bases, depletion of munitions, and there's just the cost of deploying personnel, et cetera. There's also an additional resource. This was published by the Watson School of International and Public Affairs at Brown. This is purely the cost to the American people on gasoline, and that is in terms of rising gas prices, and that is estimated at close to 38 billion. So when you aggregate those costs, it far exceeds the numbers that the Pentagon is touting out, and this sort of leads into the next advocacy call that people are saying is that we shouldn't give a dime more to fund this war, which does not have clear and apparent goals or benefits, and certainly costs to the American people. And it's particularly important to emphasize that because the Pentagon's budget already is enormous. It is record. It is a record-breaking budget over $1 trillion. So I think these are important facts that you should hold firm to your chest if someone tries to trot out that $25 billion number or say that this war deserves more funding. And here, I'll stop sharing just for a moment. And now I think I'll shift to the basic advocacy position of emphasizing that diplomacy is the only path to resolving this, including a open and firm case for sanctions relief included in that discussion. That was another component of the Obama nuclear deal, and it saw a massive benefits to Iranian people and their ability to earn money, to work, to travel, to connect with the rest of the world and build up a middle class that could sustain widespread strikes and organizing movements because it's extremely difficult for people to organize in Iran during a war environment. The crackdowns on perceived protesters, the allegations of collaboration with the Israelis are up. Political executions are up, and it's much more difficult to speak about political prisoners or shine light on them during a wartime. And when there's a deal in place, when sanctions are lifted, when the travel ban, which we currently have, which Trump has implemented on people from more than 70 countries, including Iran, is in place, that reduces connection. That makes it much harder for people to live normally. And I think that's the biggest threat to hardline politics. It's when people can live and travel and speak to one another and connect to the rest of the world. And that's a similar position that NIAC has. And so I just want to close with some thoughts on how this war has come home to affect our civil liberties here at home, and especially in the wake of the June war, immediately after. And we saw, and I can share a link in the chat if folks are interested. We saw immediately after the June war, ICE rapidly increase its detention of Iranian nationals. In the subsequent months, June and July, 300 Iranian nationals were detained by ICE. And in months from then through January, the Trump administration organized 3 rounds of deportation flights, sending Iranian nationals, many of whom had fled and sought asylum here in the United States after the Women Life Freedom protests. They sent them back to Iran. And it's the most egregious ridiculous position to say that we want to, for Trump in the one breath to say, we are freeing the Iranian people, they should rise up. But if you came here seeking asylum, if you were involved in political protests because you're Iranian, we're going to round you up, detain you for months when you've committed no crime, ship you up on a plane and send you back to Iran. So it's an intense hypocrisy, those positions and those policies. And I would add, and that while these don't only affect Iranian Americans, they are extreme and extremely frustrating for people, including the repeated violations of due process from ICE against people, and just the broad assault on the legal immigration system in this country. People who are lawfully here, who are seeking any adjustment in their visa status, in their processing, including people from New York. If you're a student at Columbia studying and you get a job offer right now, and that job offer says you want to start in a month, you can't take it because there's been an indefinite pause on visa processing for people from Iran. And that is as basic an assault on civil rights as one can see. And it's something we oppose deeply. And I guess I'll just close with a specific case. There are two women right now from Los Angeles who fled Iran seeking asylum, and their last name happens to be Soleimani Afshar. My cousin's last name is Soleimani. And Laura Loomer, the far-right, anti-immigrant, Trump-loving, quote-unquote journalist, but she really is just a propagandist lackey for the administration, found it, took it upon herself to lie and say that these women were related to the late Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. The State Department then published on Loomer's information that these women were the relatives of Qasem Soleimani, detained them, and they're now being held in ICE detention facility. There has been an investigation conducted by independent journalists Ryan Grimm and Mortaza Hussein, who spoke to their family in Iran, who reviewed their birth certificates, and found that these women have no relation to the general at all. They grew up in a province hundreds of miles away. They sought asylum here. One of them was actually jailed for participating in protests against the Iranian government. And as yet, there's been no accountability for this egregious assault on civil liberties here, all in the name of combating the big and evil relatives of this general. I mean, first off, no one should be held criminally for the actions of their relatives. God help us all if we are charged for the crimes of our uncles. But these women were also, it's now been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the claims made against them are just simply false. So I think we should keep our heads about us and call out this egregious lies as much as we can, and continue to organize in groups like this and in our communities, because sunlight is the best disinfectant in these, and the administration still likes to make claims that America is a place where anyone can do anything and seek advancement regardless of their status. And that can only be true if we uphold those principles and stand for civil liberties and basic human justice. So thank you all. I'll pass it to Lara Rabiee.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Lara Rabiee. I live in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I'm an Iranian-American. And I think I'm here on this panel really just to offer my own personal perspective about the war and the lead up to the war, and just share some of my own thoughts. Really just as an Iranian-American, like many Iranian-Americans, I left around 1979 when I was a child and moved to the United States. I had the fortune of going back to Iran on several occasions. However, I spent a year when I was a high school student, and at that time it was the middle of the Iran-Iraq War. And then I went back for a year after college. I worked in the Department of Health there. And then during law school, I also did an externship in the family courts in Tehran. Here in New York, I've been involved with NIAC and also another organization that helped Iranian refugees. So I'm just offering my own view. Iranian Americans have very diverse views and different views about the war. So this is just one. And I also have like some slides. So this is going to be a bit of an audiovisual type of presentation. And since I'm the last speaker, Diana and Charlotte, please stop me. So there's time for questions if I go over. Okay.
You see the bottom panel if it says share, the green arrow.
Yes. Oh, here we go. I found it. Yep. Sorry. I had to scroll down. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see the slides?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So the one, as Ervand sort of implied, the one point that's not there's not a lot of variation is that most Iranian Americans and the vast majority of Iranians in Iran want to see change in their government. So this is a scene from the Woman Life Freedom demonstrations. So that's the one area we're all really strongly in support of. And I've seen this also in my visits back home, that just a wide range of people are very frustrated, very angry, but for reasons that I'm imagining Ervand knows more about. There really isn't an opportunity in Iran's elections and constitutional system to bring about the change that so many people desire. I think Ervand also talked about U.S. foreign policy. So U.S. foreign policy that, as he explained, has been really focused on placing sanctions. There's been calls for war for a very long time. Now they succeeded. A segment of Iranian Americans has seen this as an opportunity to bring about the kinds of changes that hasn't been able to be brought about in other ways by Iranians within the country. So here you have, the son of the former Shah, Reza Pahlavi, meeting with a senator, and sort of really seeing an opportunity there with this administration. Many Iranian Americans I know who want to see change and have also voted for Trump, thinking that, whatever they think of his domestic policies, perhaps this is a president that could bring about change, and they voted for him. I'm not saying the majority of Iranian Americans, but there's a group that saw things that way. There's satellite TV channels that a lot of Iranian Americans watch, and some of these are really more not really news, but opinion, and very pro-war. And just even in my own family, I've seen some really just get hooked on these satellite TV stations, and it's really changed their views, made them very much pro-war. By contrast, NIAC has been opposing war and sanctions. And then the next slide, let's see. I don't know if you can see this. So this shows that the devastation that sanctions have brought to the economy of Iran, and to the currency, to inflation, and I've witnessed this in stories I've heard from family members visiting and living there, is that it's become more and more untenable to get by there and pay for your basic living expenses. And this chart kind of shows sort of a pattern where things get worse every time these administrations that are really pushing for so much pressure on Iran come into power here in the US. So after the demonstrations in January, and this is a scene from, the body bags of the protesters who were killed by security forces, I think there was even more questioning and calls for some action that by this time Trump was proposing to take and helping the protesters with. Even Nobel Peace Prize winner Shirin Ebadi had said, perhaps some targeted strikes is what Iranians need to change the course of the country towards democracy and freedom. Okay, so this is a scene from, one of the demonstrations by the Iranian-Americans who were in favor of war and, parroting Trump's statements that help is on the way in the form of, a military action. So this is NIAC's poll done a week into the war, and you can see among Iranian-Americans, there's a 50-50 split at that time, at least. A group against war and versus one that's supporting it. I think then you start to see the mood change. When war starts, you see the reality of war. And, as you know, and has been mentioned, day one, you have the elementary school in Minab bombed and 170 people killed, mostly children. This shows sort of the fuel depots that was attacked in Tehran and the toxic smoke and acid rain that resulted. So now we're seeing in those years, like many Iranian Americans, I was glued to news, seeing every day all these harms come about. Mehrabad Airport, that a lot of Iranian Americans have memories about, is attacked, the main airport inside the city of Tehran. You have heritage sites, estimated 130 heritage sites destroyed. This is Golistan Palace in Tehran. And close to 1 million civilian buildings have now been reported as destroyed. And this is all happening in March. I'm going to see if I can just temporarily show you the video that this person captured. Let me see if I can do it. Okay, I'm going to try this. Can people see Safari and the video?
Yep. Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah.
Are people seeing this?
Yes.
Okay. See if I can stop this. Okay, hi, sorry. All right, so we're seeing all this massive destruction going on of places we know, places we've seen. So let me go back here. All right. So then the newest poll, let me see if I can do this again. So then the newest poll that NIAC commissioned through Zogby is very different. Now you see, I think, let me see, what was the date of this poll? Are you seeing the slide?
No, we've lost it. If you want to bring it back.
Okay. Sorry. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So this is I'm not remembering now. I think it was the end of March, Etan, if you remember right.
Mhm.
Now you see that, the views have changed and now, a majority of Iranian Americans are now opposing the war. So yeah, I wanted to just end there really with just maybe some last thoughts. This has been a difficult time. I'll be honest, there's a little bit of ambivalence too, because like many Iranian Americans, I'd love to see a democratic Iran and change. But I think, as we've seen, what I've seen is, especially with NIAC over the years, warning about war, that there was a reason, and you can see that we're, as I think both Etan and Ervand mentioned, we're in a worse place now. The regime, it's probably going to be much harder for progressives to be able to uh, reach their goals now. And finally, Etan, you had mentioned about the importance of the connection and travel. In one of my visits there, in the organization I work for, I happened to sit next to a granddaughter of Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, and she was, a young woman, and she asked me so many questions about the United States. All she wanted to do was travel and live overseas, and I really believe it's just, it's just I'm not an expert, but more communication and more travel and interaction, the next generation is going to return to Iran with really different views, and hopefully get at that last percentage of supporters for the regime and this system of government that's not working for most people. So that's it. And now I think Bruce, I'm handing it over to you.
Bruce, can you unmute, please?
Oh, okay. Now it let me. I tried before. It wouldn't. Hello, everybody. I'm Bruce Olschuler. I'm a co-vice chair of Brooklyn for Peace. And before we start with, please put your questions in the chat. And if you want to address them to a specific speaker, that's great. If not, we'll address them to the panel. But first, if we could have a round of applause for three great speakers. So I can't hear you, but there's a react applause button. So please press that. And that's great. And thanks for that. Okay, I'll before to give people a little time to put their questions in the chat. Let me ask one of my own. The Ervand mentioned, of course, the Obama nuclear agreement. And after Trump was defeated, Biden promised to renegotiate the agreement and bring it back. Why did he fail in doing that?
Who wants to stab at it? Ervand, would you like it?
You're muted.
Okay. Yes, that's a big question. The expectation, of course, that Biden, being Obama's vice president, he would be committed to basically going back to the Obama agreement. And that was the hope for, I think, reasons I can't actually document. But since Biden openly said he was proud to be a Zionist, I presumed he was basically listening to Netanyahu's advice, I basically rejecting Obama's policies and going back to the Republican policies of supporting fully the Israeli position. And it's interesting that there was at least one person in his negotiation. He at least had an Iran task force to deal with Iran. One member of that actually, who was in favor of going back to some sort of agreement, he was marginalized, and then his security was taken away to silence him. It was sort of like a Oppenheimer treatment. if you have an expert, you don't want that expert contradicting the president. You take away his security clearance, and therefore the claim that he really has no access to information. He doesn't know what he's talking about. That was actually, I think, a major fault of the Biden administration that they failed to revitalize that. Um, I'm sure that if they had been willing to go back, Iran would have followed suit because they had accepted the Obama agreement and they actually were suffering from the fact that the sanctions had been reimposed and it was causing a lot of pain.
Okay, one audience member asked about how international law treats the destruction of heritage sites. Does anybody want to take that?
Yes, I mean, I would international heritage sites, especially UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Sites, of which there are dozens and dozens in Iran. I believe there's over 1,000. It is a violation of international law. It is illegal to strike those. And there's a journalist named Kurush Ziabari who's published a number of works documenting the extent to which those sites have been attacked and destroyed. And I would encourage folks to read his work because it's particularly the one that Lara showed a photo of, Golestan Palace, is especially a a notable one because it's where the previous shahs were coronated, and it's very ironic because uh, the shah's son Reza Pahlavi has been one of the loudest supporters of this operation, including in recent remarks. And it's very ironic that the very site where his father and grandfather were coronated was bombed in the middle of this. And I'd love to point out, Joel, I know we're Bruce, I know we're tight on time, but just to the previous question of Biden, um, Biden also, the women life freedom movement in Iran happened during Biden's term, and it was in many ways a hugely missed opportunity to actually take an approach that would stand with people. And instead, that movement, in many ways, including by people like Reza Pahlavi, co-opted it to double down on a policy of maximum pressure sanctions and maximum isolation rather than a policy of sanctions relief, engagement, travel, visa processing, and opening up.
Okay, another question just sent in. Do you think that China will press Trump into an agreement so that the Strait of Hormuz is opened up? Anybody want to take that?
Well, China, I mean, they're sitting pretty. I'm sure they're gloating over the predicament Trump has. Uh, for them, yeah, it'd be nice if Hormuz was open, but if this remains closed, the pain is going to be much more on the whole capitalist system. They can survive quite well. They're not so dependent on that. Sure, they get some oil, but it's not really a big political issue for them, or whether they don't get as much oil as they hope to get from Iran. But I'd like to add something else about the bombing. Besides the heritage sites, the recent bombing has actually bombed almost every university in the country. It's also bombed the Pasteur Institute, which is in Iranian history sort of a sacred place from 1920s. A research place for medicine, for vaccines. That, for some reason, was targeted. The Jewish synagogue in Tehran was bombed for mysterious reasons. So this is not a targeted bombing. This is a massive bombing of the whole country. basically boulderize the society.
Uh, okay, next question is, given that Israel does appear to have nuclear weapons, is there a possibility that they will feel so threatened that they will initiate nuclear war?
I I don't feel like that is an immediate possibility. However, Netanyahu um, is an egregious and rogue actor. I mean, uh, Israel has bombed last year, I believe, 7 countries, and it goes back to a policy of or a strategy rather that Netanyahu has very clearly and openly had for decades. His clean break strategy, which Ervand touched on in detail, but the idea that one can ignore the Palestinian issue by remaking the Middle East around him, and that's clearly the goal. However, the even Israel is concerned for its PR and global standing in some ways, and I don't think there would be a way back if they were to drop a nuclear weapon at all. Perhaps the leadership is unconcerned with what that would look like by now, Israel being unpopular as it is. But that is they have that capability, and it's important that people call it out, especially as Trump keeps invoking the nuclear capability of Iran, which they do not have and have at least before he was killed, the Ayatollah had forsworn.
Yeah, it's probably worth adding that Iran is a signer of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, unlike the United States, of course. Um, the I might add, somebody asked something about what Trump would do to lower gas prices. I would take a small part of that. The only proposal he has so far is to suspend the federal gas tax, which is only 18 cents a gallon, and will save the average American $5 a month. Uh, So, but somebody did ask, well, why shouldn't Iran have nuclear capability to defend itself? Uh,
I'd like to actually respond to that. I mean, I think the Iranian decision makers are quite convinced that Israel is quite capable of and willing to use nuclear weapons on Iran if necessary. And that's why they are actually not interested, genuinely not interested in making a bomb, because they know if they go for a bomb, Israel would be willing to use the nuclear weapons on Iran. On the other hand, you think about it. Let's say if Iran did have a nuclear weapon, would it be willing to use it on Israel? Because to think of it, unless brilliant scientists in Tehran develop a bomb that can distinguish between Jews and Palestinians, you drop bombs on Israel, it's going to kill a lot of Palestinians. That's not going to go well throughout the Middle East if Iran had a bomb and used it. So Iran, even if it had a bomb, it would be inhibited by of the use of it. While for the Israelis, the only inhibition would be that the public image of how the world would react if it did it. So it's another reason I think why Iranian foreign policy, however, the internal policy is despicable. Its foreign policy is actually quite sane, quite logical, and quite, I would say, cautious. And that's one reason that they haven't over the years built a bomb, because they know the costs would be very high.
I have a message from one of our Brooklyn for Peace advocates who is reminding everybody that on every Saturday, Brooklyn for Peace has a vigil outside Atlantic Terminal from 2 to 3. And if you'd like to volunteer, just show up on Saturday. It's on, I think, right in front of the Atlantic terminal. Okay, here's another question. Why is Lindsey Graham attacking Pakistan for helping Iranian planes land in Pakistan?
Well, Lindsey Graham has, I think, been one of the chief opponents to diplomacy throughout his career. Mr. Graham has never met a war he didn't like uh, or cheered on, and I imagine, and he, as Lara showed in her presentation, is very closely aligned with Reza Pahlavi and deeply invested for some reason, which I can't imagine so many of the good people of South Carolina could understand. I can't understand it, but he is deeply invested in continuing wars and cheering them on in the Middle East, and he is on news channels and constantly inserting himself into U.S. foreign policy, specifically seemingly to sabotage diplomacy. It's bizarre, frankly.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I have one here. To what extent are the UAE and Saudi Arabia constraining Trump in his aggression, given that these nations are the most direct targets of any Iranian retaliation?
Is that for me?
That's not addressed to anybody in particular. So whoever wants to take it.
Well, I think that's you have to distinguish between Emirates and the other states. Emirates actually was involved in the bombing of Iran, worked with Israel and United States, and that's why Iran actually retaliated by targeting UAE. The others have been much more cautious, and they've been telling Trump that if you go to war, it's going to be very costly on us because they're in a very vulnerable position. So even though Trump has good relations, financial relations with these Gulf states, he was willing to push aside those concerns and listen more to Netanyahu's advice. But they were telling Trump before the war that if you go to war, basically Iran is going to attack us and is going to close the Gulf. So there was no secret about that. Iran had told the Gulf states that if there is war, they will basically close the straits and they will actually inflict pain on the Gulf states. And this was, I mean, again, it's not a surprise unless you were basically tone deaf. The Gulf states had conveyed this warning to Trump, and he'd ignored it. And you have to realize the Gulf states are very vulnerable. You need only a few targeted bombs on oil, gas, desalination centers, and these Gulf states would just collapse. Already in Emirates, there's a exodus of money. The billionaires who used to enjoy living there in comfort have fled for safer shores, and their economies are going to be drastically affected if this closure of the Gulf continues.
I would,
Well, thanks. Oh, go
uh,
ahead, please. We have
I
time.
would I would just add that Trump and Rubio and Hegseth had announced Project Freedom to shepherd ships through the strait, and after 2 days, they scrapped that project and announcement. And a little fact of as to why they did that was because the Saudis and Kuwait said that they did not want us to use their airspace for that. It was a significant news point. It wasn't covered as much here, but it indicates a loss of trust in our ability to defend and support allies, even in this operation. And really just a disconnect and discord from Trump and his team to announce this operation of freedom as a solution and then to scrap it, and to have the Saudis uh, say we can't use your no, you're not going we're tired of this, and you can't use our airspace. It was a very significant um, development there, and it's a sort of shift. I can't remember a time when that's happened.
Okay, thanks again for a very informative discussion. We know a lot more than we did before tonight. One person in the chat pointed out that the House is scheduled to have another War Powers resolution voted on again in the next week. And they suggested that you call your House representative, especially for those folks who have a Republican House representative, give them a call and let them know. And I'll turn it over to Diana for a final word. But thanks to everybody who came, and thanks for a great discussion.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. I'll just echo what Bruce said. Thank you to Ervan, Etan, and Lara for your time, sharing your knowledge and analysis and your experiences. And thank you to everyone that logged on tonight. We will be sending an audio or a video recording of tonight's forum in the coming days. It'll be in the follow-up email. So thank you all for your attention and your thoughts and your questions. And we look forward to our next program. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.